All right, guys, John Deere LA-110 in for service, yearly service on this thing. I do it every year. The man's a police officer, so I cut him a break. He's a nice guy. Known the family for a while. Got a bag over there because it was raining. He's got some slits in the seat. You want to be nice to your customers. If the seats have cracks in them or anything and you know it's going to be out in some weather, put a bag over it. This way they won't get a wet butt when they ride it. His mother actually drives this thing because the father's a little incapacitated, so you want them to have a nice dry rear end, especially if they store it in a shed all the time. They're not used to having water in the seat. So do yourself and do them a favor. Put a bag over the seat if you're working on it and it's going to be out in the weather. Because like with me, mine are stored outside until I work on them. What I want to talk about today was grease points. People look at these tractors and they say, what do you grease on one of these cheap L-Series John Deere's? Well, there's actually 7 points you can grease on these things, and I'll show you each one. First thing that you notice, you have the grease points on the spindle. Each spindle has a grease zerk, so that's 2. Each wheel, if you look up in here, see that thing on top there? Where is it? Let me see. Where is that thing? There it is. That's a grease fitting up there. That's this fitting for the spindle for the wheel. You don't take your wheels off, so you got to grease them and get grease in there. So that's the fitting. You know, each year all the grass and dust and everything gets over, people don't even see them, but make sure you grease the wheels. So that's 4 fittings total. Then you got the last fitting, which is actually underneath the axle. So I don't know if you can see it here. Where is it there? Hold on, let me get underneath here, see if I can show you. This is the hidden fitting. This is one nobody knows about. This is one nobody uses. This is the one no one cares about. And this is why the axles fail. If you notice, here's under the tractor. And let's see, right up in there. Look at that. There's a grease fitting. Hard to see, but there it is. There's a grease fitting right above that bolt. See that? It's right up above that bolt. You can see there's a grease fitting there. That's your axle pivot bolt grease fitting. That's probably one of the most important ones, because if the axle, which pivots a lot, doesn't get grease, you're going to ruin your axle. So take a look. You can even feel your hand underneath the axle and make sure that you see it, clean it, and grease it. Sometimes this bolt may be in the way, the one that holds the front of the deck. Well, if it is in the way, it's only a pin. Take it off. Get in there with your grease gun and grease that axle pivot. It's important. Okay, so that makes 5. Now you got 2 more. And the 2 more, I'm not gonna really show you, but they're actually on the mower deck spindles. Okay, I gotta clean the deck off and get to them. But each of these spindles does have a grease fitting. So you have 2 grease fittings on the mower deck. So you have 5 on the front axle, 2 on the mower deck, which makes 7. Grease all your fittings. If you don't grease the fittings, you end up having something like this, where you have a bad axle. And people have been asking me about this STX 38 and what I'm going to do with it. Well, this axle, if you notice, I showed people, you can see there's quite a bit of play. These axles, they're shot, okay? Now, this axle here for an STX 38, which I have under the tarp there, is $433 from John Deere, brand new. You can still buy it, okay? Now, this is an axle for a black deck STX 38. The yellow deck STX 38 does not use rods like this to pull the front of the deck up. It has 2 braces that go sideways like this, and there's a bar that connects to the front of the deck. So on a yellow deck, there's 2 bars that come out to connect the deck to the axle. On a black deck STX 38, there's 2 threaded rods that come out and attach. You have to make sure you get the right one. 100% of the stuff I see out there is usually yellow deck. I went to look for an axle for this on eBay, and I did find one, and I actually got a good price. It was shipped to me for under $100. Here it is. I just got it today. FedEx guy came today. I ordered it Wednesday, got it today from Ohio to Connecticut, so that was a great deal. And what's nice about this, these spindles are super tight. There is no play in them. And I can see that the owner greased it up all the time. He used his grease fittings. You can see they're clean. He used them, he greased it. So this thing has been greased well. Another thing to grease on these, people don't see it, the axle pivot, okay? It's underneath, it's hard to see. People don't know it's there. You gotta grease the axle pivot. If there's a 10mm bolt that goes through that holds the axle onto the frame, you gotta grease the axle pivot, okay? Make sure your bushing is nice and loose in there. Make sure the grease comes out from between the bushing and the tubing. Just make sure the grease goes in and make sure it's working. There's a few ways that you can free up grease fittings as far as if it's not pumping, if it's all solid inside. You can take a propane torch, you could heat the housing and keep pumping until it pumps through, because the heat will melt the grease and allow it to go through. And also they have injectors for grease fittings where you can inject fluid in there under high pressure, and that's another way to unclog them. And I'll do a separate video on that in one of my tool talk videos. There's a grease injector tool that you can use to free up grease fittings. It's mostly used on larger equipment, backhoes and things like that, but I'll show you that in a later video. But guys, remember your grease fittings, grease everything that needs greased. Everything on the tractor, look in your service manual. It will tell you exactly what the grease points are. It'll tell you exactly what grease to use. Make sure you do it. Your machine will last longer. You'll thank yourself for it. All right, guys, that's it for now. Talk to you soon.